What if the most feared force in the human psyche wasn't masculine aggression but feminine desire? What if Freud buried something, not out of ignorance but out of fear? A truth too raw, too uncontrollable, too ancient. This isn't about lust. It's about something deeper, something primal, veiled in charm, passivity, and softness. But that has the power to build or destroy a man from the inside out. Carl Jung called it the anima, the hidden feminine. But when she's unconscious, she doesn't nurture. She devours. Every man who's ever felt addicted to a woman, confused by her signals or powerless in front of her presence, has touched this shadow. And every woman who's used desire without knowing why has been used by it too. This video reveals what Freud refused to say out loud. The seductive side of the feminine is not innocent. It's a force, and it's time we look it in the eye, the hidden hunger behind her sweet smile. She smiles, not a loud, flamboyant smile, but a soft, delicate one. The kind that disarms you, the kind that makes you feel like you're finally safe, finally seen, finally chosen. There's something magnetic about it, something ancient. That smile speaks a language beyond logic, a silent promise of affection, of attention, of mystery, and you fall for it. You don't even notice it happening. That's the terrifying part. But what if that smile wasn't just sweetness? What if it wasn't just charm or natural beauty? What if, buried deep beneath that softness, there was something else? Something Freud saw, but couldn't fully name. What if there's a hunger behind it? A hunger not for connection, but for emotional power. Not for love, but for control. Not to give, but to be fed. Freud once explored the unconscious drives that shape human behavior. He believed sexuality was at the root of most actions, often repressed, hidden, twisted into neurosis. But even he stopped short when it came to the full reality of female desire. He sensed its power, yes, but he didn't fully dive into its shadow. Carl Jung did not. Jung spoke of the anima, the inner feminine archetype in the male psyche. But he also understood the anima not only as an internal force, but as something projected onto real women. When a man meets a woman who feels different, who activates something in him that words can't describe, it's usually his anima, being awakened. That's why she feels irresistible, almost divine. But here's the danger. If the woman he projects this anima onto is unconscious of her own emotional patterns, if she hasn't faced her own wounds, her own need for validation, her own shadow, then what she offers isn't love. It's seduction born from absence, a game not of joy but of need. That smile, it might be sincere, but sincerity doesn't mean awareness. The smile may carry warmth, but also fear. It may offer closeness, but demand emotional payment. And the man, unaware, gives everything, not because he's weak, but because she touched something sacred in him. She awakened a part of him he didn't even know was there. And that part now craves her approval, her attention, her light. But light, when unbalanced, can burn. Desire, when not integrated, becomes hunger. And hunger is dangerous, not because it's evil, but because it's never satisfied. Women, like men, have a shadow. But while the male shadow may show up in domination, ego, or anger, the female shadow often expresses through emotional manipulation, passive control, or seductive withdrawal. Not because women are manipulative by nature, but because culture taught them that their power lies in being desired. So what happens? A woman learns to smile to get attention, to charm, to feel safe, to seduce, to feel seen. Over time, this smile becomes a survival strategy. And when it works, when men respond, chase, give, it reinforces the belief, I must keep smiling to be loved, even when it's not real, even when she's hurting inside. That's when things begin to break, because eventually the smile isn't enough. She wants more. Not more affection, but more control. Not more intimacy, but more emotional leverage. And so the game deepens. Now she doesn't just smile, she withholds. She delays responses. She creates uncertainty. She tests. She watches. She notices how much power she has in making him wait, in confusing him, in making him doubt himself. And the man, he doesn't see the game. He just wants the smile back. He wants the warmth again, the connection, the closeness. So he tries harder. He gives more. He chases stronger. But the more he gives, the more she withholds. Because now the desire is not mutual. It's weaponized. Freud saw the beginnings of this dynamic, but he lacked the symbolic language Jung offered. Jung understood that unconscious desire turns into possession, and a woman possessed by her, unconscious desire becomes a mirror that reflects not who the man is, but what he lacks, and he will keep chasing that reflection, trying to complete himself through her. But here's the painful truth. You can't feed someone who doesn't know what they're starving for. If her smile hides pain, no amount of your love will heal it. If her charm masks fear, your devotion will only make her push harder. If her desire is rooted in emptiness, your presence will only highlight her void. And when she senses this, when she feels your effort, your loyalty, your intensity, it might not warm her, it might irritate her, because now she knows she holds the power. And the moment she holds power over your emotions, the game changes completely. It's no longer about love. It's about control disguised as intimacy. And this is the darkest secret. She may not even know she's doing it. The smile was never a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. The shadow behind the smile is not evil. It's unacknowledged pain. It's the little girl who learned that being beautiful is safer than being honest. That being wanted is more valuable than being real. That being chased is more rewarding than being seen, and unless she wakes up, unless she integrates that part of her, the hunger will remain. She will attract men not to love them, but to consume their energy, not to build connection, but to feel her own value reflected back, and once she's full, she will disappear just like that, and the man will be left wondering, what did I do wrong? But the real question isn't what he did, it's what she needed and never found, and maybe what he was trying to heal in her that she never asked him to fix. The hidden hunger behind her sweet smile isn't a flaw, it's a wound. But when that wound drives desire, it becomes a weapon, and that's what Freud buried. Not that women desire, but that desire itself can become a shadow. When love turns into a silent test, it starts quietly. Not with shouting, not with accusations, just distance, a pause in the reply, a colder tone, a change in energy that you can't quite describe, and suddenly the woman who once laughed with you, touched you, admired you, is now distant, distracted, unpredictable. But she hasn't left. No, she's still there, still around. But something has shifted. This is when love turns into a test. And you didn't even know there was a test. You begin to question yourself. Did I say something wrong? Did I stop making her feel special? Is she upset or is she just busy? But the real question isn't about what you did. It's about what she's waiting for. This is a dynamic that Carl Jung understood deeply. When a woman's unconscious emotions go unexamined, especially her own wounds, fears, and insecurities, those feelings don't disappear. They simply shift forms. And one of the most common forms is testing the man in front of her. But this isn't the playful kind of test. This isn't, does he open the door for me? This is a deep, invisible, emotional assessment. She doesn't tell you she's testing you. She doesn't say, here's what I need to feel safe again. Instead, she becomes quiet, passive, watchful. She waits to see what you'll do without being told. Will you sense that something's off? Will you chase her harder? Will you feel guilt, panic, confusion? Because if you do, she feels powerful. Not in a malicious way, but in a psychological one. For many women, especially those who've been emotionally neglected or hurt in the past, controlling uncertainty becomes a way to regain safety. And what's more uncertain than a man who doesn't know how to make her feel desired anymore? In her mind, she's not playing games, she's surviving, but in your mind you're being punished and you don't know why. This silent test often begins after the initial stage of intimacy has passed. Once the spark softens and the fantasy fades, she begins to see you more clearly, and more importantly, she begins to feel seen by you. And that is terrifying, because now her deepest fears rise up. What if he gets bored of me? What if I'm not enough? What if he sees the real me and leaves? And instead of facing these fears head-on, she unconsciously decides to protect herself the only way she knows, by testing your love before you have the chance to disappoint her. The test is emotional but unspoken. She may not know she's doing it. You certainly don't know you're taking it, but everything becomes part of it. The time it takes you to reply. Whether you notice she's off, if you try to fix it or ignore it. How much effort you put in when she gives you less. And here's the painful part. You can't pass the test. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because it was never meant to be passed. The real purpose of the test is not to measure your love. It's to soothe her own anxiety, to make her feel in control of something uncontrollable. Emotional closeness. Freud would have called this a defense mechanism. Jung went deeper. He saw it as the shadow of the anima, the distorted expression of feminine energy that arises when a woman hasn't integrated her own emotional chaos. Instead of owning her vulnerability, she projects it. Instead of expressing her needs, she hides them behind silence. Instead of asking for reassurance, she makes you guess. And guess what? The more you try to prove yourself, the more unattractive you seem, because now she doesn't feel you're leading. She feels you're chasing. And that creates repulsion, not desire. Because here's another hidden truth. She doesn't want you to pass the test. She wants you to transcend it. That doesn't mean becoming colder. It means becoming centered, unshakable, grounded. Because when you stop reacting, when you stop dancing around her silence, trying to win her approval, you send a different signal. I'm not here to be measured. I'm here to be real. That, ironically, is what breaks the cycle. But many men fall into the trap. They confuse emotional manipulation with emotional depth. They think, if she's testing me, it must mean she cares. If she's hot and cold, it means she's passionate. If she pulls away, I must have done something wrong. No. If she's testing you instead of communicating with you, it means she hasn't faced her own emotional shadows. And you're becoming the scapegoat for her inner confusion. But don't blame her. She's not evil. She's not heartless. She's simply acting out a story she's told herself since childhood. If they really love me, they'll never stop proving it. But love isn't a stage, and men aren't performers, and desire dies the moment authenticity is replaced by performance. This is what Freud feared, not desire itself, but how fragile it becomes when wrapped in silence and shame. He feared the chaos behind the mask of sweetness. But Jung embraced it, looked straight at it and said, only by facing the shadow can we become whole. So what do you do when love becomes a test? You stop playing, you speak, you express, you stop chasing and start choosing. You don't try to fix her silence. You invite her into clarity, and if she declines that invitation, you walk away without resentment, because a woman who tests instead of speaks isn't looking for love. She's looking for emotional control, and if you allow yourself to be tested long enough, you'll begin to test yourself. You'll question your worth. You'll shrink. You'll disconnect from your masculine essence. That's the slow death Jung warned about, the erosion of the self in the name of false connection. But you can stop it, not by fighting her, not by proving anything, but by remembering love is not earned through emotional endurance. It's revealed through emotional truth. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to stop taking the test. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. The illusion of innocence. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't demand, accuse, or attack. She simply looks at you with wide eyes, soft tone, and a quiet sadness that seems almost angelic. And in that moment, you feel something stir inside you, a protective instinct, a guilt, a need to fix. Whatever is wrong, even if you don't know what it is, this is the illusion of innocence. And it's one of the most powerful weapons in the shadow of female desire, because sometimes the most dangerous manipulation comes not from anger, but from softness, not from confrontation, but from emotional fragility. And the truth is, she might not even realize she's doing it. Freud often spoke of repression, of the unconscious mind hiding unacceptable urges. But what happens when those urges, particularly the desire to control, to possess, to be adored, hide behind a mask of helplessness? That's the part he never fully explored. But Jung did. Jung understood that within every woman there's a child and a queen. The child seeks to be rescued, adored, protected. The queen stands in her power, takes responsibility, and knows what she wants. But when the child dominates the psyche, especially in adult relationships, desire becomes distorted. Not expressed, but disguised as need, as innocence, as you should have known. And here's where it gets dangerous. The man begins to internalize the blame, because how do you defend yourself against someone who's not attacking you? How do you set boundaries with someone who claims to be hurt, not angry? You can't. Because you'd look like the villain, even to yourself. And so you adjust. You apologize more. You walk on eggshells. You anticipate her moods. You overcompensate just to keep that soft sadness from reappearing. But here's the hard truth. That sadness is sometimes a strategy, not consciously designed, but emotionally ingrained. A learned behavior from a world that rewarded feminine vulnerability more than feminine truth. From a society that told women, be sweet, not strong, be desirable, not direct, be soft and you'll be protected. And so they learn that the fastest way to gain emotional power is not to demand it, but to appear like it was taken from them. This is the shadow of innocence. And when it mixes with desire, it becomes a powerful tool of control. Because now her needs are no longer needs, they're silent expectations. Her discontent is no longer personal. It's your failure. And love becomes a stage where you're constantly trying to earn her peace of mind, without ever being told what will actually bring it. She doesn't have to raise her voice. She just has to look disappointed, and that look will haunt you. Not because she's cruel, but because she's trapped in a pattern where being desired is her only language of worth. She doesn't know how to express her truth without fear of losing you. So she retreats into sadness, into silence, into softness, and lets your guilt do the rest. And you begin to mistake her helplessness for honesty, her quiet disapproval for emotional depth, her unreadable moods for mystery. But they're not mystery. They're masks, because deep down she's not innocent. No one is. She has thoughts, judgments, desires, agendas, just like you. But somewhere along the way, she was taught that expressing those things would make her too much. So she tucked them away and learned to express through suggestion instead of speech, through energy instead of clarity. And that's what Freud missed. He saw women as emotionally driven, even irrational at times. But he didn't see the power behind their silence, the control behind their helplessness, The shadow behind their sweetness, Jung saw it. He knew that when the feminine becomes disconnected from its core, it doesn't become weaker. It becomes manipulative, not out of evil, but out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of losing the only power it was ever allowed to have, being needed. So how do you break free? You see through the illusion. You stop mistaking emotional fragility for truth. You stop apologizing for things you didn't do. You stop feeling guilty just because she's unhappy. Because here's the most liberating truth. Her feelings are not your responsibility. They are real. Yes, they matter, but they are hers. And if she uses those feelings to manipulate your behavior, if her innocence becomes a tool to shape your actions, then what you're in is not a relationship. It's a performance, and performances kill desire. Because nothing kills masculine energy faster than being emotionally cornered by someone who refuses to take ownership of their own needs. So the next time she looks at you with that quiet disappointment, pause. Don't rush to fix it. Ask, what is it that you're truly needing right now? If she can answer honestly, there's hope. If not, and the guilt cycle continues, then it's time to ask yourself a deeper question. Why do I need to be the rescuer? Because sometimes the woman isn't the only one caught in the illusion. Sometimes the man has his own fantasy too, to be the one who saves her, heals her, makes her whole. But that's not love. That's codependency dressed as chivalry. Love isn't about rescuing innocence. It's about meeting truth, and truth isn't always sweet. It's often messy, uncomfortable, real, and that's what makes it beautiful. Because when a woman drops the mask of innocence and shows her real face, her anger, her needs, her passion, her fears, then and only then can true intimacy begin. Not performance, not guilt, but raw, unfiltered connection. And you'll no longer feel like you're being punished for things you didn't do. You'll no longer chase approval from someone who doesn't know what they want. You'll no longer be seduced by the illusion of innocence because you've seen the shadow and you've chosen presence over performance, truth over guilt, real love over silent control. And that's the kind of love Freud never wrote about. But Jung did. And now you live it. The game of mixed signals. One moment she leans in, touches your arm, looks into your eyes with warmth, softness, longing. The next, she pulls away, turns cold, distracted, distant. Then, just when you start to give up, she comes close again, laughs, flirts, reminds you of why you fell for her in the first place, and you're hooked. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system has been hijacked. This is the game of mixed signals, one of the most confusing and emotionally destabilizing dynamics in romantic relationships. And when it's driven by unintegrated female desire, it becomes more than just confusing. It becomes dangerous. Freud spoke of the tension between the conscious and the unconscious mind, of how what we repress doesn't disappear. It returns in distorted ways. And for women raised in cultures where expressing direct sexual or emotional desire was seen as shameful, this repression runs deep. So what happens? Desire doesn't vanish. It transforms into contradiction. She wants closeness, but fears losing control. She craves intimacy, but dreads emotional exposure. She longs to be wanted, but punishes you for wanting her too much. And so she creates a dance, a back-and-forth rhythm where you're constantly left guessing, does she love me or not? Did I do something wrong? Should I give more or walk away? But here's the dark truth. You are not supposed to have clarity. That's the trap, because clarity ends the chase. And for someone whose unconscious identity is built on being desired, being chased, being the prize, clarity feels like death. Not literally, psychologically. So instead of telling you how she feels, she drops hints. Instead of saying what she wants, she pulls away to see if you'll notice. Instead of asking for reassurance, she creates doubt, just to watch how much you care. It's not always intentional, but it is always strategic, because uncertainty breeds obsession, and obsession feels like love when you don't know better. Carl Jung explained that the psyche projects what it cannot integrate. A woman who hasn't explored her own ambivalence, her fear of vulnerability, her shame around desire, her guilt about needing affection, will project all of it onto the man in front of her. And the result? She becomes unreadable, a living contradiction, and that contradiction becomes her power, because now your focus isn't on yourself anymore, it's on her. What does she mean by that text? Why did she take hours to respond? Why was she so affectionate last night and cold this morning? You become emotionally disoriented. You stop trusting your gut. You overanalyze everything, and this is exactly what keeps you locked in. Because when your nervous system is constantly swinging between hope and confusion, the brain begins to form a trauma bond, a psychological loop where the highs feel euphoric and the lows feel devastating. And in that roller coaster, you mistake intensity for intimacy. This is what Freud hinted at in his theories of repetition compulsion, our tendency to seek out emotional patterns from childhood in adult relationships. If you once loved someone who was inconsistent with you, you will unconsciously be drawn to inconsistency again. And if she has learned that her value lies in being chased, she will never give you the certainty you need. Because certainty would mean the chase is over. And if the chase is over, what's left? This is her fear, that once you truly have her, you'll stop trying. So she never lets you fully have her. Instead, she gives you pieces, moments, just enough to keep your hope alive, but not enough to feel secure. And here's where it becomes even darker. The moment you detach, she panics. The silence she created now becomes unbearable. Your indifference threatens her identity. Because if you're no longer trying to win her, what does that say about her worth? So she returns, suddenly affectionate again, suddenly responsive, suddenly apologetic or seductive or emotionally open, and you think, finally, we're back. But it's not real connection, it's re-engagement, just enough to pull you back into the loop, and soon she withdraws again. You're not in a relationship. You're in an emotional slot machine, and the payout is always just one more spin. Away, but you never win. Not fully, because winning would mean peace, and peace kills the game. Freud never called it a game, but Jung would have seen it as archetypal. The siren, the enchantress, the untouchable muse. Not because she's evil, but because she's possessed by a pattern older than her, a pattern rooted in fear, shame, and a deep need to feel. Powerful in a world that once told her she was powerless, and unless she confronts that pattern, names it, owns it, heals it, she will keep repeating it. With you, with every man, over and over. So what can you do? You stop playing. You don't respond to the silence with desperation. You don't respond to the affection with naive excitement. You don't give your peace to someone who trades in emotional confusion. You ask for clarity, directness, accountability, and if she can't give it, if she continues to hide behind contradictions, you walk, not to punish her, but to protect your soul. Because the longer you stay in this loop, the more you lose yourself. You forget who you were before her. You forget what stillness feels like. You forget what it's like to love without feeling like you're walking through emotional fog. And love should never feel like fog. It should feel like sunlight, warm, consistent, real. So the next time she pulls away, then comes close again. Pause. Don't react, don't chase, don't hope, observe, and ask yourself, am I loving her or am I addicted to the confusion? Because confusion is not love. It's the shadow of love. And Freud's greatest oversight wasn't that he misunderstood women, it was that he underestimated how deeply powerful their desire could become when it's wrapped in silence, ambiguity, and fear. Jung saw it. He taught us to face it. Now, so can you. The power of withdrawal. She doesn't yell. She doesn't beg. She doesn't chase or plead or demand answers. She simply disappears, emotionally, energetically, sometimes even physically. No closure, no warning, just space, distance, silence. And yet, that silence screams louder than any insult could. Because now you're not arguing anymore. You're guessing. You're searching for meaning in her absence. And in doing so, you give her what she wanted all along. Your complete emotional focus. This is the power of withdrawal, one of the most subtle and devastating tools in the shadow of female desire, and it's effective, because it doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like hurt, like self-protection, like I just need time. But beneath that innocent surface, there's often a deeper game being played. Freud spoke of repression, but rarely addressed the feminine power of silence. Jung, however, understood that silence is not always passive. Sometimes it's a strategic assertion of control, especially when a woman feels emotionally unsafe, unseen, or out of power. Withdrawal becomes her fortress, her weapon, her test, and the man left behind. He begins to spiral, not because she said anything cruel, but because she said nothing at all. He replays every interaction, analyzes every word, blames himself. Did I come on too strong? Was I not enough? Should I have done more? But that's the trap, because now it's not about what she did, it's about what you failed to do. And in that mental prison, you begin to chase a ghost, not a person, a memory, a feeling. You crave her presence like a drug, not because she gave you peace, but because she gave you just enough chaos to make your nervous system dependent on the resolution. And this Freud never fully understood. That female desire, when unconsciously driven, can use absence to create obsession. Jung did. Jung knew that when a woman withdraws without communication, she's often not just escaping conflict, she's invoking power. Because withdrawal makes you notice her, it makes you crave her return, and most dangerously, it makes you question your own reality. Maybe you're the one who's too intense, too emotional, too needy. You begin to feel like you're the problem. And that feeling becomes her power. Because now, when she decides to return, if she does, it won't feel like reconnection. It'll feel like relief, and you'll do anything to keep her from leaving again. You'll lower your standards, compromise your values, accept the bare minimum, all because you're afraid of that silence returning. That's the cycle, and it's as old as time. The feminine shadow doesn't always scream. Sometimes it simply vanishes and watches what you'll do in the emptiness. But here's the secret. If her withdrawal is healthy, it comes with communication. I need space to process. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'll come back. When I can speak clearly, but when it's silent, sudden, and without explanation, it's not space, it's control, a subconscious demand. Prove your love through your pain. And you will. At first, you'll reach out, apologize even if you're unsure what for. Double text, question yourself. But the more you chase, the more you lose yourself. And the more you lose yourself, the more power you give to someone who may not even know why they're pulling away. That's the paradox. She's not always malicious. Sometimes she's terrified of intimacy, of her own emotions, of being fully seen. So she disappears before you can see her darkness, before you can touch the parts of her she hasn't accepted, and in doing so, she creates yours, your anxiety, your confusion, your dependency. This is the dark dance that Freud observed but never defined, the unspoken agreement. I'll remain. A mystery, so you never abandon me. And it works, because mystery breeds longing, and longing, when left unchecked, breeds obsession. But obsession is not love. It's a trauma response, and once you're caught in it, everything she does becomes amplified. A short reply feels like rejection. A compliment feels like salvation. Her silence feels like punishment. Her return feels like redemption. You live for her validation and die in its absence. But this isn't about her anymore. It's about you, because withdrawal only has power over the parts of you that haven't healed. The boy inside you that fears abandonment. The man inside. You that confuses inconsistency with passion. The soul inside you that craves recognition at any cost. And until you face those wounds, you will always fall for the woman who disappears, not because she's right for you, but because she feels familiar. So how do you break the cycle? You honor silence, not as a trigger but as information. When she withdraws, don't panic, don't chase, don't perform. Observe. Is she communicating her need for space, or is she creating confusion to feel desired? Is she emotionally regulating herself, or is she outsourcing that regulation to you? These are hard questions. But they free you, because once you stop fearing her silence, she loses the power to control you with it. And once she loses that power, she is forced to choose, speak her truth, or lose your presence. And that's where real intimacy begins. Not in withdrawal, but in return, not in distance, but in vulnerability. And you stop being the man who waits for a text that never comes. You stop being the emotional servant to someone else's wound. You stop living in the gap between connection and confusion because you've remembered something vital. Your peace is more important than her presence. And if she can't meet you in that peace, if she needs to disappear to feel powerful, if her silence feels like punishment rather than reflection, then she's not your partner. She's your lesson. Freud saw the games of desire, but Jung saw the consequences. The slow erosion of self in the name of love. Now you see it too, and this time you don't beg, you don't plead, you don't collapse, you breathe, you stay still, and you watch what her silence reveals. Because silence can say many things, but it should never say, "You don't matter."